Wow, and we are live. Thank you everyone so much for being here, and welcome to Healthy Living Live. I'm Chef AJ, and my guest today is Victoria Moran. She is the author of Main Street Vegan and 12 books. She's been featured twice on Oprah, and she was voted Peta's Sexiest Vegan over 50 in 2016. She's the host of the Main Street Vegan podcast, the director of the Main Street Vegan Academy, which is an exciting week-long intensive training in New York City where she trains vegan lifestyle coaches, educators, and entrepreneurs. And please welcome my friend and fellow Aries, Victoria Moran. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's always so much fun to be with you and have an Aries fest.
Yeah, absolutely, especially since we didn't get to see each other this year at Summerfest.
Yes.
Right.
I took my dog to Canada because he gets so freaked out by fireworks.
As many of them do. So, just before we get, we're going to talk about something a little bit different than all of Victoria's wonderful books today. You're going to be excited to hear she's stuck her finger in another vegan pie. But I just wanted to say, and I've always wanted to say this to you, if words, like for instance, if dictionaries had pictures instead of words, like I always think that compassion would be a picture of John Pierre, and I think the word lovely, it would just be your picture. That's what I think of when I think of that word. That's your style. I mean, even though we're both Aries, I'm sort of a beat them over the head Aries, and you're sort of a like gentle kind of, I mean, we have the same message, but I just love the way that you deliver it to people, and you're so accessible and just lovely. Is the word of the day to describe Victoria Moran.
Well, back at you.
Oh, well, thank you. So this is so exciting because you are a film producer now. Tell us all about how you got started. And I'm going to take myself off screen so they can just look at you.
It's so funny for a girl from Kansas City to have these titles. I mean, I remember when I had my first thing published, I had a little daily meditation published in the Daily Word magazine when I was 19. And even though it didn't have a byline, I knew it was mine. That was really special. And then to be an author, and now, oh my goodness, to be producing a documentary. It's like, who knew life was going to be this exciting? So how this happened, I always love backstory. I hope you and your viewers do as well. A young man heard me speak at the Unity Church here in New York City, sometime in the kind of early mid-2000s. And I never saw him after that. He moved away to Florida, got married, had a little girl. And then on my Main Street Vegan podcast, which is a live radio show on Wednesday afternoons before it becomes a podcast, that particular day we had a book giveaway. And this gentleman won the book, and I had a note from the engineer. He wants you to call him. So I did. And he said, I want to do a film to introduce vegan living to people who identify as religious or spiritual. Would you like to be the producer? And my first thought is, producers have lots of money. I said I didn't exactly have a cool million sitting around to invest in a movie. And he said, oh, no, that's not what I need from you. I need connections. And I said, well, those I have. So we started working together almost 3 years ago now. And the film is just about ready. And I say that, and anybody who's done a film or looked into the film business knows that there is a lot between just about and ready. But I've seen it. I've seen it in its entirety. It's called A Prayer for Compassion. The filmmaker is Thomas Wade Jackson, and it's a beauty.
Oh, I can't wait. So when can we see it, and how can we help get the word out to get people to come see this?
The first place that it's going to premiere is going to be in Tempe, Arizona in October, and that will be Dr. Silas Rao and the climatehealers.org are having a conference. So it's going to be there, and then it's going to start to be all over everywhere. We have a Unitarian church in Connecticut that wants to do a screening. We're talking about a theatrical screening in Kansas City. So all that will be revealed. There is a trailer. You can go to my website, mainstreetvegan.net, click on film projects, and you can see the trailer there for A Prayer for Compassion. It's so beautiful, and it has people in it that we all know and love, and other people that are brand new. And what's one of the many things that's so beautiful about it is that he has found people from not every faith on earth, because there are many, 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 but it goes all the way from Native American to Zoroastrian and just about everybody in between. He takes a trip to the UN climate conference in Morocco and talks with world religious leaders there. He also goes to India and talks about dairy, because India is very familiar with being vegetarian, but getting off the ghee and the butter and the milk is an issue there. So it's jam-packed.
Well, so how is this different from some of the other plant-based documentaries that we've been seeing sprouting up lately?
Yeah, well, and there are many, and they're wonderful, and that's thrilling. I think that it's a little bit like Game Changers is particularly geared to men and people who are interested in athletics. And this is definitely geared to people who are religious or spiritual. And the filmmaker has actually thought about doing one later on that is for ethical humanists, people who don't have the idea of a divine presence, but certainly want to be ethical in their living. That's very valid too. This one is for people who either are Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Jains, whatever, or they have a deep spiritual path and feel that this connection to the great beneficence, this idea that life has purpose and meaning, these are the people that we're trying to find and focus on and show this movie to, because they've already signed on to a philosophy that has compassion at its core. It would be really difficult to find almost any religion that doesn't have love there at its heart. And I know there are all kinds of trappings, our prophet's better than your prophet and our book's better than your book. And, all these things that humans can argue about and have wars over and all the things that have happened through history. But there is at the core of every belief system that lasts this idea of love and mercy. And of course, for us as vegans, all we have to do is take that just a little step further, and you wind up making different choices about what you eat and where and how you live.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to tell you a couple of the comments. Heather's saying that's so cool. She loves that it has a spiritual view. And our mutual friend JP says, you can't get better than Victoria. We love you. Because to me, veganism at its core is compassion. I mean, they're really, to me, they're synonymous.
Absolutely. When you look at the definition of compassion, it is to feel with another. So for most of my life, very few people had the opportunity to feel with a farmed animal. We didn't think about them. We didn't know what they went through. We just went to the grocery store or the restaurant and ate the food, and that was it. But now, because of the internet, especially, lots of other influences as well, people are able to see inside animal agriculture, inside slaughterhouses. And so this invitation to feel with the suffering and the premature death of these beings, we're invited to do that. And many of us are doing that. And that's one of the reasons that veganism is growing so much. But what's really interesting in a religious setting is how difficult it is to get that across to a congregation. I was at a really interesting meeting Sunday night here in New York City at the very famous Judson Memorial Church in Greenwich Village. It's been around since, I think he said, 1851. And they were very big in the abolitionist movement and suffragettes and civil rights and gay rights and all these things. So it's a really wonderful church with a major social justice emphasis. And the young man who hosted was an associate minister there and a vegan. And he said, it's just the hardest thing to get this message across to these beautiful people who will do anything for homeless people, for the disenfranchised. But it's a hard sell. And so what we're hoping to do with a prayer of compassion is make that sell a little softer.
It sounds incredible. Cheryl's saying that her calling to become vegan was, in fact, a spiritual calling. I'm sure you're familiar with the quote, until man extends his circle of compassion to all living things, he himself will not find peace.
I am indeed.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense. And I think what happens sometimes when people get involved in some sort of spiritual path, maybe it's yoga, something that maybe they find in adulthood, or maybe they rediscover the faith of their childhood, and they really feel like, I've got it now. I've got the answer. I have peace that I didn't have before. Hallelujah. This is good. And it is good. But then when somebody says, oh, by the way, it could be even better if you would look at veganism. And interestingly enough, so many religions have health and healing as part of their history as well. We know that the yogic path, which grew up within the Hindu tradition, has always talked about diet, nutrition, health, and Christianity was a healing ministry from its earliest days. And so when we offer veganism to people, we're not just offering a way to end the horrible Holocaust for animals, which obviously we need to be doing, even if there were no other reason for making this change, but we're also offering people a way to heal. So it really covers all the bases.
I'll never forget, about 6 years ago, we were having dinner at New York outside at Pure Food and Wine. And somehow we were talking about the idea that a lot of the, I don't even want to say vegan doctors because they don't like the V word. A lot of the plant-based doctors who coincidentally are atheists don't like the word vegan and they use plant-based. And I said to you, I don't like the word plant-based because I'm not plant-based. I'm plant exclusive. And there's
That's exactly what you said.
I'll never forget it. And I've been using that ever since. Then I'm on a plant exclusive diet. I am vegan too, but it's interesting how so many of the medical professionals just shun the V word.
Yeah, I think that's too bad, especially because if you look at the studies use the V word because plant-based isn't specific enough. If you talk to somebody like Mark Bittman, he'd say, well, I'm plant-based. I'm vegan till 6. Come on, that's plant-based.
Right.
Joe Cross of Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead says in his second film in his wonderful Australian accent that I wish I could imitate. He said, oh, I've never felt better. I'm being plant-based, love being plant-based. I'm 60% plant and 20% animal and 20% processed. And so there are different ways. I mean, I realize that most of us and most of the people listening to this call, viewing this on screen, are used to whole foods plant-based, which is vegan or just about. But I was out for dinner in Columbus, Ohio, not long ago, and went to dinner with a wonderful fellow in the movement, and a couple of other people came along. And they were going on and on about how wonderful it was to be plant-based. And the woman was going to go back to school to be a plant-based physician. And then when the waiter came, the woman ordered a chicken dish and the man ordered a lamb dish. And I think because my jaw fell to the table, the man explained, oh, we're not vegan, we're plant-based. And we eat animal protein about twice a month. Well, I don't know how often they eat it. I just know they ate it that night. And it was a real education to me because I'd always thought, doesn't plant-based give you a kind of lot of leeway? And I thought, absolutely. Wow, I didn't know it was that much leeway.
That's crazy. Well, so we have an interesting comment from Jennifer, and I think her comment is great because it has a lot of ramifications that I've been thinking about. She says her female priest in Brighton, UK, is vegetarian and very interested in becoming a vegan. It would be great if we could see this film. And so maybe at some point you will franchise this and let like people all over the place have, screenings like they've done with some of the other films.
Yeah, we are prepared to do that already. We already have translations into a few languages. Certainly we don't need a translation for the UK. So that is something, AJ, if you could just put us in touch, we'll make sure that she and her church can get the film.
Absolutely. Because, when you think about it, just people that are heads of their flock, whether it's a rabbi or a priest or a pastor, they have so much influence on their congregation. And one place I can already think of that would be a great place to screen it out here is in Redondo Beach, where Pastor John Jensen and dietitian Susan Jensen that's where we put on our Healthy Tastes of LA. And they have the people where they're learning this, and that would be a perfect place to have a message like this, because when a pastor or a priest or a rabbi does it, it makes it a lot more acceptable and easy to get the congregation to do it because their after church socials are going to be vegan. And I think it's great. It's a great inroad is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, there are so many ways that clergy and congregations are doing this. And what's really fascinating to me is that very often it's the congregation that influences the clergy. So it doesn't matter where you start. And it's really the same in any kind of connection. It's not just about religion and spiritual centers. But if you've got your heart into this, then you just need to speak up. I know that in my denomination, it's kind of interesting. Unity, it's a liberal Protestant church that was founded in the 1800s by very vocal vegetarians. I'm pretty sure they would have been vegans if they had heard of it, but they were really, really strong vegetarians. But over time, that message, after they died, was lost. But now there are some ministers who are trying to bring it back. And in fact, my podcast comes from their network. They actually invited me to do that and said, it's about time we get back to our roots. So sometimes it's a hard sell, even when it's in the teachings. And I think it's really in all the teachings of every religion. And certainly when we hear from Jeffrey Cohen of Jewish Veg, when we hear from Bruce Friedrich and Dr. Charles Camozzi, who are Roman Catholics, and we hear from Sohaib Sultan, who's an imam at Princeton, it's like, yeah, it's really in there. But certainly something like in Seventh-day Adventism, we know that they recommend vegetarianism, even veganism, but not everybody does it. And of course, that's good. You don't want to be in some kind of religion where there's somebody checking up on you all the time. But it is interesting how sometimes other things are so much easier to sell to people than let's not be addicted to animal foods anymore.
Right. But you're right about the Seventh-day Adventists. There's so many churches throughout the United States and the world. We've got Dr. Hans Deal. That would be a great place for this film to be seen. And there are other faiths, like you say, that are either vegan or near vegan or vegetarian, like the UU churches. Universal Unitarianism has an ethical eating tenet in their faith, and Self-Realization Fellowship. So it sounds like you've got a lot of places where this movie could be seen.
Lots of places. And then we'd love to show it at some places where nobody's ever even talked about this before. One of the things we're excited about, a lot of churches do this Daniel fast, and they often do it in January because there's a story in the Bible that Daniel and his friends were captured and they refused the king's dainties. They refused the alcoholic beverages and the meat and the very fancy food, and they wanted basic, simple food. They wanted the kind of food even Dr. Esselstyn would approve of, just beans and vegetables. And at the end of the time, they had more muscle. They were stronger than the king's soldiers. So these churches do the Daniel fast, 21 days or 30 days, basically being vegan. And I always think the phrase is so funny because it's like, wow, if these people are fasting for 21 days, then I have fasted for 35 years. But it's still a wonderful way to get a sense. And if you really do it right for 30 days, you feel enough different that sometimes that's an invitation to keep going.
Absolutely. And I always feel that it's really sometimes hard to have compassion for animals while you're eating them.
Yeah. You cut that out and then everything in your life changes.
So Sarah has an interesting question, and I think about it because I know at Summerfest every year, Milton Mills and Roberta Schiff present a faith-based talk about veganism. And she says, does the movie address the biblical statement that man has dominion over animals? This is what I hear from different people who are faith-based.
Yes, it goes into that two different occasions from two different fascinating people. The first time it comes up is with Jeffrey Cohen of Jewish Veg, and he really lays it on that what we're talking about is the same kind of dominion that parents have over their children. We're not supposed to eat them. We're supposed to protect them and take care of them. And he even goes into the Hebrew and explains exactly what that means and where it comes in the Bible, which is adjacent to the place where we're told that the natural diet for humans is vegan. And in fact, Eden was vegan. Even the animals that are now carnivores were in the Garden of Paradise story vegans, and so were the people. And then toward the end of the film, we were very lucky to have Susie Welch be part of this movie. Some of you know Susie because she is a regular contributor on the Today Show. She's also a business journalist. She's got a couple of shows on MSNBC. Her husband is Jack Welch, former CEO of GE. And what surprises a lot of people is to learn that both Jack and Susie are vegan. And what can surprise some people even more than that is that they are evangelical Christians. And Susie just gives us a preaching on dominion and this idea that this dominion is the dominion that God, for believers, has over us. The idea, it's love, it's tender mercy, it's always being there. It is exquisite care. It is never leaving us in our time of distress. It is love beyond love that is comprehended. And we're told that that is what we are supposed to have with the animals. It's really powerful.
Yeah, terrific. So why do you think, Victoria, that so many, if not most religions, have left animals out of their circle of compassion?
I think it's cultural. And if you look back to the time when virtually all of the religions that we think of as established were established, it was when most people on this planet probably did have to depend on animals. We weren't able to ship produce in from other places. People were dependent on just what was going on in their area. And I think, too, there's something about evolution. And when it's time for humans to grok to the next thing, even in my lifetime, I've seen what's gone on with civil rights. Certainly, it's not where it needs to be. But I remember when basically the U.S. South had apartheid, just like South Africa. Very, very little difference there. That has changed to a great degree. I was there to see women's liberation get started. The idea that there used to be job ads and they would say help wanted male, help wanted female. And the female jobs were teacher, nurse, caretaker, and they were always at lower pay levels. If there was a male and female job listing for the same job, the male pay was higher. That, again, is not perfect, but it's changed. Gay rights, so many other things have happened over time. And it is time, I believe, with everything that's in me, for animal rights. And there is an interesting quotation attributed to Jesus where he said, I have many things left to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. And I think, well, isn't that interesting? Because Jesus didn't talk about slavery. I mean, slavery was an evil then, just like in the 1800s, just like now in those places where it still exists. But for whatever reason, he didn't address that. And I think, you know what? Maybe this vegan thing is kind of like that. Maybe people just weren't to the point where they could embrace it when these religions were being formed, but they can embrace it now. And then, of course, there are some religions that have always had vegetarianism in them. One that Thomas loves focusing on the film is Jainism, because Jains are really about ahimsa, about dynamic harmlessness. And they don't even eat root vegetables because you kill too many insects and microorganisms in harvesting them. And they've never had eggs. But interestingly enough, because I think being in India, where dairy is, you know, the sacred cow in Hinduism, and that kind of comes across to others as well, where the dairy is sacred too. And so the Jains, like the Hindus, have always had dairy products. But that's beginning to change. It's very, very exciting. He interviews Pramodha Chitrabhanu, who's a wonderful Jain teacher. Her husband is considered one of the highest Jain saints alive today. And Thomas also, when he goes to India, gets to meet people that most Westerners are never allowed to meet. And these are the sky-clad Jain sadhus, the monks who give up everything, including clothing. Oh, skyclad is just what you think it is. They don't wear any clothes. They have no possessions. And Thomas had been interviewing some other Jains and telling them about dairy, and they were unfamiliar, some of them, like, oh gosh, well, maybe I need to look into that. But when he talked to this saint, this man who has spent his life in meditation and prayer and this concept of ahimsa, and he asked through the translator, well, what about dairy? And the saint says, there is no justification to take dairy.
That's amazing because I know you went to India for this documentary, and I always found it interesting that if they said they were an ethical vegetarian, not an ethical vegan, that at least in the United States, it's the cruelest industry of all of them, and that it almost seemed like an oxymoron. And you would think that with all we know now from people like Dr. Neil Barnard about how deleterious dairy is, that maybe they would just stop based on that.
Yeah. Well, cultural traditions go very, very deep, and we certainly have plenty of them like that in this country, and yet they can change. I did something really fun this weekend. I went to a Yankees game, which is not something I do very often, but it was one of the things on the silent auction table at a benefit for Catskill Animal Sanctuary, and I just made sure I got those Yankees tickets. So I went with my husband and my son-in-law and a friend, and it was so interesting to see that really at the Church of Baseball, I mean, we're talking the house that Ruth built, how much vegan food? Now, again, it wasn't the super healthful kind of food that you and I like to choose, but the idea that somebody could go to the baseball game and get the hot dog, get the burger, get the sausage, get the burritos. I mean, it was all there. And even 5 years ago, it was not. So things are changing all over.
Fantastic. I just want to point out, if you hear some cooing, we are not having any sound difficulties, and it's not Victoria's husband. When we were testing the sound, I'm like, there's something wrong. I keep hearing cooing.
Oh, well, that's Thunder. Thunder is a pigeon that my daughter rescued. She does wildlife rescue. She has a lovely little nonprofit here in New York City called Urban Utopia Wildlife Rescue. And she specializes in urban mammals, the bunnies and possums and squirrels. But the Wild Bird Fund on the Upper West Side sometimes gets more birds than they can handle. And so they ask Adair if she can take them. So Thunder came with a group of other baby pigeons, and almost nobody has seen a baby pigeon. They're very funny looking. You want to Google baby pigeon. They're really interesting. So she raised this group of fledglings, and they were ready to go, but Thunder couldn't fly properly. So she took him through with another group of babies, and he still couldn't fly. So they went to the vet and determined that he's blind in one eye. So he can fly a little bit, but he can't steer, so he falls to the ground. So this means that he needs to be a companion pigeon. So a couple of months after adopting Thunder, my daughter, who is a performer, had a great stroke of good luck, and she was cast in a show, a 9-month touring show as an aerialist. And she is a lifelong vegan, by the way. So
wow.
I think that some of those strong, powerful vegans built their muscles before they were vegan. Well, not my daughter. This is vegan all the way. But she's gone for 9 months, and somebody needed to keep the pigeon. And I have to tell you, AJ, I had no idea the kind of relationship that could develop between myself and somebody who lives in such a different body, but still has interests and ideas and talents. In fact, we got Thunder a little birdie basketball game that attaches to the side of the cage. And even being blind in one eye, he figured out that the point of this game is to get the ball in the basket, and he does it all the time.
And does your dog get along okay with the pigeon?
Not really. You know, it's Earth. And we talked earlier about Eden being vegan, and maybe someday Earth will be Eden again. But no, I believe that my adorable little dog believes that this bird is a dog toy, and he doesn't understand why all of his other dog toys are over there in the box where he can get to them. And we keep this one locked up, but maybe someday he'll get lucky.
Oh my goodness, that's hilarious.
I do get the bird out a daily, or even a couple of times a day when my husband takes the dog out or a dog walker comes. We go out in the courtyard and get a little bit of nature time. It's so nice. If anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, Main Street Vegan, I have a lot of pictures and videos of Thunder, and I can promise you there will be more.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. It's so true what you say. You never know how you can love an animal. And I think while you're eating them, it's not even a possibility, you know? I remember, I became vegan when I was 17. That's 41 years ago. And I remember one of the things that really, when somebody said, you love your dog so much, how could you eat that cow? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, literally, I'm like, there was no argument, and it was that quick. But I think people just do not make the connection. Like Melanie Joy, her book about why we love dogs, eat pigs, wear cows. People just, if it's not a a cute little bunny or a cat or a dog, people just, I don't understand why some are food and some are pets. They're all living, and so to me, they're all potentially pets, or at least not food.
Yeah, yeah. I remember we didn't have a lot of vegan propaganda back in the 80s when I was raising my daughter, but there was a bumper sticker that said, animals are my friends and I don't eat my friends.
Right. And I had one that said, friends don't let friends eat animals. So
I love that.
Are you familiar with Dr. Richard Schwartz and his book, Judaism and Vegetarianism?
Yes, wonderful, wonderful book. And his other one, I think it's Who Stole My Religion.
Right.
Yeah, we would have loved to have had him in the movie, but he's living in Israel. We did get Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz, who's just, my goodness.
Fantastic.
I think one of the most powerful lines in the film is when Rabbi Yanklowitz is saying, when I held my children for the first time, and I felt this overpowering love like I'd never felt before. He said, this is the kind of love that God has for all his creatures. And if any one of them were not here, creation would be incomplete. And for anyone who is a person of faith, any faith, when you think about that, that's huge. I mean, if you love God, then you just don't want to do that to one of his children, to somebody he loves that much.
Right. Yeah. And even if you, quote, don't love God, if you're a mother that had a child, how could you participate in the dairy industry when you see a veal calf being ripped from her? It's just.
Yeah. I think the whole women's rights movement is just a wonderful place for vegan infiltration. And it has infiltrated quite a bit, especially with young women. I find with women more in my age group, they're still cautious and hang on to some very old ideas about calcium coming from dairy, and I have to have it for my bones. But, we all hold on to old ideas. We're all still growing. You asked me about my little dog. My little dog is an extremely picky eater, and he has some health issues, and he is still not 100% vegan. He's had his periods, and then things go on, and then he can't be vegan, or so says the doctor. And I feel terrible about this. I want my whole life to be vegan. I certainly want my whole house to be vegan. But, sometimes things are just a little bit tough when you're living them out on Earth.
Right. And I'm in the same boat as you. All my dogs were adopted late, and they're as vegan as they can be, but not 100%. Now, JP says, Compassion, the Ultimate Ethic, one of my favorite books that you wrote. Thank you, Victoria.
Oh, that's, bless your heart. Jean-Pierre, I mean, honestly, and I know he doesn't care about people saying great things about him because he's about the mission and not himself. But if reincarnation is true, I would bet money that Jean-Pierre is St. Francis reincarnated. He is just the most remarkable person. And I've known JP since I think he was 18 or 19. And my daughter was just a toddler. We went to these vegan potlucks that Ted Zagar had in the suburbs of Chicago. And Compassion, the Ultimate Ethic was a book that I wrote. I didn't know when I wrote it that it was going to be a book. I thought it was just the paper that I had to write for a fellowship. I was actually getting a degree in comparative religions, and I earned a fellowship. And the only caveat was you study whatever you want as long as you leave North America. So I went to the UK to study vegans. And at the time that I did this, I was not vegan yet. I finally was able to make the complete switch in 1983. I did the research in the UK in 1980-81. And it was the most wonderful experience. And I was looking then at veganism through a religious/spiritual lens. And now that I'm working on this film, so many years later, it's really wonderful to see that come full circle.
Tell us about India, because that the cows are sacred, and but what did you find in India when you were doing this film? Anything you expected or didn't expect?
Yeah, well, no, I did not go to India with the filmmaker to do the filming, but I have been to India twice, extended trips some time ago. I think that for myself, I was so surprised by India because I thought this is going to be the wonderful spot in a very long journey that I was on, where I'm going to be able to rest in knowing that just about everybody is vegetarian, just about everybody holds reverence for life as their highest ethic. Everybody's into ahimsa. This is going to be cool. Well, it was cool. It's an amazing country, but I was so shocked that things were not as I expected. The first thing that really blew me away, and not, we sometimes use that phrase in a good way, this was not that, was the treatment of the bullocks, the castrated male cows who are pulling unbelievably heavy loads. And it's really this cycle of oppression, because the people who were being cruel to the bullocks were people who were very poor, and life and society had oppressed them. So everybody is a victim there. But the work that's being done by Peta and Animal Aid with these street animals is really wonderful. The whole sacred cow and this milk thing within Hinduism and then within the Indian culture at large is very historic, very long-standing, and very interesting. So the belief there is not just that because the cow is sacred, the milk is sacred, but there's a belief that ghee, clarified butter, is really a medicine, and it is considered a medicine in Ayurvedic medicine. And it's very difficult to convince people that something that they have heard from the medical community, from the religious community, from their parents, from their traditions, may not be all it's cracked up to be. And something that shocked me was to learn that India is the biggest leather exporter in the world. This is the place where cows are sacred. But the way that happens is that when cows can no longer give milk, when they can no longer produce babies and provide milk for that baby, and people get some of it as well, then they're generally put out onto the street. So they're not slaughtered. In fact, in only 2 states in India is it even legal to slaughter a cow, but they're out fending for themselves. So they're very, very thin. They're often hit by cars. They have so many problems. And then at night, bands of people from those 2 states where you can slaughter cows go through with trucks and pick up cows and take them for slaughter. And the leather industry, a lot of people don't know, is also a human rights issue, because to tan the leather, young boys are in these horrible vats of very dangerous chemicals, older people too, but there's a lot of child labor in that industry, and it causes so many health problems. These people do not live a full life. They also develop a very strange kind of vitiligo. All of the melanin comes out of parts of their skin. So there's just nothing good about killing animals for human purposes in any country, whatever the history. And, you know, sometimes we just have to say, God bless you, all who have come before me. I appreciate you. I honor the traditions, but I have to go forward today, 2018, with ahimsa as the guide, and I'm going to be vegan. And that's what a lot of the people that Thomas talked to were telling him.
Yeah, terrific. Jean says this is an amazing interview, and I want to read Sarah's comment, which is interesting. It says, changing a religious paradigm is really no different than changing the medical paradigm.
Ah, how fascinating.
Yeah.
And one of the things in the film, in addition to talking to all these very interesting religious people in India, Thomas talks to a couple of vegan physicians. One woman is an ophthalmologist, and she talks about one of her very early patients who came to her because his type 2 diabetes had caused him to go blind in one eye. And she told him to cut out, he was already vegetarian, but to cut out dairy. And just with that step taken, he recovered, he reversed his diabetes, his eyesight returned, just amazing stories. And again, India is a very large country, so we need stories like that to go viral, and hopefully a prayer for compassion will help that to happen.
Yep. So I know, Victoria, you've been involved with yoga ever since you were a teenager. Does that have anything to do with compassion or food or?
Oh, very much. It was yoga that pushed me into vegetarianism. I had tried to be vegetarian when I was 13 because I loved animals, but I didn't know what to eat. I tried to live on cottage cheese and fruit cocktail, and I got really hungry and ended up relapsing on my mom's roast beef. But when I was 17 and I started reading about yoga, now at that time, yoga was not what it is now. I read every book about yoga in the Kansas City, Missouri Public Library, and that was all 3 of them. And then I read them over again. And they all said, of course, if you're going to be serious about yoga, you have to be vegetarian. Now, they weren't saying vegan, but yogic vegetarianism means no meat, no fowl, no fish, no eggs. So had I really been a good yogi, all I would have had to have changed to go vegan was the dairy part, but I was having eggs and all that, and I relapsed back to fish a few times in those early days. But yoga was always two-pronged for me on the food thing. First was ahimsa. You can't grow your soul. You can't expect to come to enlightenment whenever you are creating a physical vehicle out of substances of pain and suffering and horror. There's also this discipline component. You know, yogis are very disciplined. The idea is you get up early in the morning, you do your physical practice, you do your spiritual practice. And then if you go off and have a cheese omelet somewhere, it just does not compute. It took me a while. I was dealing with a binge eating disorder. It took a while for me to get from vegetarian to vegan. I'm not proud of that. It's just my story. But the other part of yoga that was always fascinating to me was that the yogis were the first nutritionists. And they were looking for the diet that would be most conducive to meditation. So they talk about foods that they called tamasic. And these are what we would today think of as junk food, the stuff that's full of chemicals and artificial colors, alcohol, stuff that's been sitting around for a really long time, and meat, because it's actually rotting. And so these kinds of foods, the yogis said, would make you really tired, would make you not interested in higher thought or spiritual development. And that if you eat that kind of food, it makes you that kind of person. And it's really interesting when you think about what are people being fed in our prison system, those kinds of foods. And then over on the other side, the yogis talked about this principle of rajas and rajasic foods that are very, very stimulating. So we're talking coffee, or if you go to countries where they don't drink coffee and they make the tea so black and thick that it can almost get up and walk, salt, lots and lots of spicy foods, fried foods, eggs. These are all stimulants, stimulants, stimulants. So if you want to meditate, if you're eating those tamasic foods, you fall asleep. If you're eating the rajasic foods, you can't sit still. So in the middle, the yogis said there's this beautiful group of foods that they called sattvic, or balanced. And these are almost what we would call a whole foods plant-based diet, not quite, but vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds. And they did say milk from healthy cows. So what I tell my yoga friends today is try to find a healthy cow. And if you're talking about holistic health, how can we have cruelty and environmental degradation and say, oh yeah, I'm doing this for my health?
Absolutely. So people have already changed their diet. How do they get other people in their churches or synagogues or even their yoga centers to listen to them without prejudice, what they have to say?
Yeah, I think the first thing is attraction activism, which is a phrase that I absolutely love. And I guess I kind of stole it a little bit from the 12-step programs where they tell the recovering alcoholics, if you have something that somebody else wants, then they're going to go to any length to get it. So you really want to be, again, not like a setup. I think one of the problems in the vegan world and the plant-based world today is that we all feel like, oh my gosh, if I'm not looking like some kind of fashion model or retired fashion model or an athlete, then there's something wrong with me. And even, and this is one of my great pet peeves, if someone becomes ill, they don't even want to share it with their vegan friends because they're ashamed of that. So not that at all. This is earth. This is not heaven. Things happen. But I do think that if you can be as bright and happy and healthy as you can possibly be, especially if things change for you. If you started being vegan and you had some extra weight to lose and it came off easily and stayed off. I mean, I know for Chef AJ and myself, that's happened. I'm walking around some 60 pounds lighter than I once was without dieting, just with being vegan and getting recovery for the inner parts of that situation. But I think to just really be there shining. So you are the first point of activism, action. That's just being you. And when people ask you things, you don't want to tell them too much. I remember a fellow named James Lennon who used to run the Natural Hygiene Society. Now
I love him.
Isn't he great? Now called the National Health Association. And people would say to him, well, what's wrong with eating meat? And he'd say, I don't know. There's really anything wrong with it. And they'd say, yeah, but you don't eat it, do you? And he'd say, not very often. And they'd say, well, how long's it been? And he'd go, 23 years. And when you're not giving people, the whole cell, then if they're really interested, they're going to ask for more. The other thing is to let the food do activism for you. And lots of times people think, well, if you're really on a healthy kind of whole foods diet, that's pretty basic. But you know what? That is the tastiest food out there. Anytime you go to some kind of banquet where everybody else is having rubber chicken and you get a beautiful vegetable plate, they'll always say, ooh, how did you get that? Well, I got it because I'm vegan and you could be too. And so to just bring wonderful food, it doesn't always have to be rich cookies or anything, but if you're into those, they're great for bringing people along. And just allow. Another thing that you can do is offer to give a workshop at your spiritual center about this. So it's not that everybody has to listen to you, and if they don't want to hear it, that they feel it's being forced on them, but just offer, because a lot of people are interested in this. They really do want to know. A lot of people and a lot of spiritual people, they feel for the animals. They don't know what to do with it. They're worried about how this would affect their family and their extended family, and they don't know about the health benefits, and they may think that there are health consequences. So you can offer a wonderful workshop with food, of course, to just share all this. When I do those at Unity churches, I call them the Fillmore Diner, because the founders of Unity, those vegetarians back in the 1800s that I talked about, were named Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. So I say this is the Fillmore Diner. You're going to go vegan with Charles and Myrtle. And so you can find some way to couch it in your church or your synagogue. And I think that this is the age of the vegan miracle or the vegan synchronicity, that because it really is time for animals to be liberated, there's inspiration, there are people that you're going to meet, there are things that are going to crop up to make this easier that weren't there 10 years ago, but they're there now.
Yeah, terrific. Great minds must think alike, because when you mentioned about the banquet and your food looked better and they said, where'd you get that? And you go, because I'm vegan. I always find a way in my life to always say, because I'm vegan. So if somebody compliments my skin, I'm like, well, thank you. It's because I'm vegan, or whatever it is. It's always, oh, you're so fine. Well, it's because I'm vegan. Everything in my life. That's what I say. That's the answer to everything.
And it probably is the answer to a whole lot of stuff.
That's so true. That is so true. So speaking of diet, have you done any tweaks to yours lately?
Well, I have been, because I am a little bit out there in some of my interests, and I have discovered the medical medium, Anthony William. Do you know about him?
I saw him in person in LA recently.
That's right. You did. You told me that. I forgot. Forgive me. So what I have learned from him is the power of fruits, vegetables, herbs, and wild foods. I always knew they were good for me, but the power in these foods is absolutely astonishing. So I'm eating some things that I didn't eat a year and a half ago. I discovered him last fall. So the first thing with anybody who's familiar with his work would know is the wild blueberry. Because wild blueberries not only have all these amazing antioxidants like the cultivated blueberries, but if you cut a cultivated blueberry, it's clear on the inside. So you're only getting the antioxidants from the skin. The wild blueberries are smaller, but they are blue all the way through. And he says that these plants, if there's a fire and they're burned to the ground, like the terrible fires California has been experiencing with climate change and all these things going on, that if wild blueberries are burnt to the ground, you don't have to find some seeds and replant. They'll come back on their own. They're just incredible adaptogens. So every morning there are wild blueberries in my smoothie. And some of the other foods that I'm eating that I never really thought about before. I mean, I ate them sometimes, but I didn't eat them a lot. I'm eating a lot of asparagus, a lot of cilantro, which I know not everybody likes, but if you do, cilantro is supposedly something that helps push the toxic heavy metals out of the body. And that we all have a lot of those just because of living in the modern era. I'm eating papaya. I'm eating or drinking lemon water every morning. And I'm also drinking celery juice, which is supposed to bring back the hydrochloric acid to the level that it was when you were 25 and really help with digesting your food and having a happy tummy. So yeah, lots more raw, colorful food than I was eating before. And I thought I was eating a lot of it before.
Wow. Well, it sure looks good on you, whatever you're doing. You know, I always thought, you know, I mean, I'm not, what I'm trying to say, I'm not implying that you guys should get married because you're already married. But if vegan were a country, I could see, you know, Dr. Neil Barnard as the president and you as the first lady without being married. But you know where I'm going.
I get
right?
it.
I'm not trying to hook you guys up, but
maybe we could just redistrict so that the vegans carried the vote.
Yeah, we need a vegan. It would be so cool if there was a vegan country, wouldn't it? Or a vegan island somewhere.
Wouldn't it? Because that's one of the arguments that we get. People say, well, there never has been a fully vegan culture. Well, I'm not sure that we know that. In fact, every now and then they talk about finding some tribe that appears to be vegan or basically vegan. But yeah, it'd be a good country and I would like to live there. I just hope it's Manhattan.
We need one on the West Coast too, though.
Well, we could be bi-coastal.
Absolutely, absolutely. So other than this fabulous film, A Prayer for Compassion, that you are the producer of, is there anything else new in your life or work these days?
Oh my goodness, thank you for asking. There's so much going on. I run Main Street Vegan Academy, which is just an amazing 6 days when people come in person to New York City and become certified vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. And I'm just so proud of all of my graduates. JL Fields, I'm sure a lot of your viewers know JL Fields of the vegan air fryer and vegan pressure cooking. And she's also the co-author with me of the Main Street Vegan Academy cookbook. She came through our very first class. And about a year later, we had a student named Kat Mendenhall, who is featured this month in Oprah's magazine because she has this fabulous vegan cowboy boot company in Dallas. So it's just wonderful and amazing to run this school and see people now from 25 countries carrying the vegan message for health and peace and ahimsa and saving the planet. That's one of the best things that I do and keeps me busy.
Well, I just I've been doing this all throughout the broadcast, alternating between your name and your website, mainstreetvegan.net, which coincidentally is where they can go to see the trailer for your upcoming film, A Prayer for Compassion, just by going to click on film projects and they can see the trailer. So how can they see the film, in their community?
Yeah, we're not quite debuted yet. So if they can just stay in touch, and I'm just going to move this screen over a little bit. I don't know if that affects anything, but they can go to @CompassionMovie on Twitter, or the website, thecompassionprojectfilm.com. We changed the name in the past few months. Or on Facebook, Compassion Movie. And if anybody wants to sign up for my list, for my newsletter over there at mainstreetvegan.net, we will be keeping you fully apprised of when it's available. And actually, I'm perfectly happy to give my email address, victoria@mainstreetvegan.net. So if you want to have a screening in your area, whether it's at a religious institution or any place, we would love to talk with you about that, because obviously we want to get it in front of as many faces as possible. Vegans, of course, but non-vegans are the ones that we really hope will see it and join us.
Wow, that's terrific. Well, this hour has gone so fast. So I just want to ask you a question that I love to ask people that I interview, interesting people. Who in your life has been the greatest influence to make you be so awesome?
Wow. I think I have to say my nanny when I was a baby. I've been through a series of nannies because my parents both worked, and these was the days before daycare. And they found this amazing woman, Adeline DeSoto. I called her Dee Dee. And they didn't know that she was into all kinds of cool stuff. She had studied yoga and Rosicrucianism and theosophy, and brought me up on all these fascinating ideas. And she was actually the first person to share with me the word vegetarianism. I brought the 4 food groups home from kindergarten, and she said, "Humph, there's some people who never eat meat and they're called vegetarians, and I could take you out to this restaurant and get you a burger made out of peanuts. You'd think you were eating meat." Well, we never went to the restaurant because she didn't drive, but she was my biggest influence, and I would say my first guru.
That's awesome. I love learning stuff like that. Well, it has been such a pleasure talking to you guys. So please go to mainstreetvegan.net and sign up to be on Victoria's mailing list, so that when the film comes out, you will be notified where there'll be a screening near you, and you can find out more about the Main Street Vegan Academy and listen to her podcast and all like that there, because she is just awesome. And thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for telling us about this extraordinary film. I can't wait to see it. And if I can help you get it anywhere in LA or host a screening, I would be more than happy to do that.
We say yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Terrific. And thank you guys so much for watching another episode of Healthy Living Live. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious.